This video is about social and emotional development in infancy. The first theory that we want to talk about is Erik Erikson's theory. Remember that Erikson had said that at each stage of development there is a battle between two particular sides of an issue, and that battle or that internal crisis at each age period defines that age period. So for social development within infancy, he says the battle is between trust and mistrust, and that this is dictated entirely by how the social environment of the infant responds to it. So in particular here we're talking about caregivers. If a baby cries because he needs fed, the parents or the caregivers could either respond immediately, or respond delayed, or not respond at all. And these different responses from the parent develop different responses in the infant. So an infant whose needs are taken care of immediately is going to develop trust, whereas an infant who's either left to deal with it for a while by themselves or for whom they have to deal with it entirely by themselves, they're going to develop mistrust. This is really the basics of attachment theory, and before we talk about attachment theory per se, I want to talk about some of the early research that led to it, done by Harry Harlow with baby rhesus monkeys. What happened is that Harlow took these infant rhesus monkeys from their mom when they were born and raised them in an environment with two artificial moms. Each was made of a wire body and had a fake head, and one had a bottle attached to it, just the exposed wire with the bottle, and the other one didn't have a bottle, but the exposed wire was covered with terry cloth, like a towel. And he wanted to know how much time does the infant spend with each of these mothers. Harlow found that these baby monkeys spent a vast majority of their day with the mother who's covered in terry cloth, cuddling her and holding on to her. And this is what he referred to as contact comfort, the idea that the intimate connection, the touching between a mother and an infant was very important for infants' development. John Bowlby took this idea and applied it into humans. So he said in the same way, the contact between an infant and the caregiver is important for human development. In particular, he said the caregiver acts as a secure base for human infants. What that means is a place for protection, a place for comfort, a place for love, and that based on how the caregiver acts, whether they're a secure base or an insecure base, develops our internal working model. And this is how it ties back into the Erikson's idea. Bowlby says that based on our caregivers' responses to us, we develop expectations, or an internal working model, like a script or a schema, of how people should respond to us, or what we can expect from the social world. Babies who have their needs met quickly and appropriately are going to develop an internal working model where they can trust other people and feel safe with them. A baby whose needs aren't met is going to develop an internal working model where they feel mistrustful of other people and that they don't feel safe with them. So after he developed this theory, they needed a way to test it, and he had a graduate student named Mary Ainsworth who developed a task we refer to as a strange situation. In the strange situation, they bring one-year-old infants and their caregiver into a laboratory that includes a playroom that the infant's never been in. And there's 3 stages. The first is they measure how does the baby play when the caregiver is present. Then they ask the mom or the dad to leave, and they want to see how the infant responds to the caregiver leaving. And then a few minutes later, the caregiver returns, and again they want to see how the infant responds. So Ainsworth ran hundreds and thousands of babies through this strange situation, and what she noticed were some patterns emerging, and those patterns have been used to develop what we refer to as the attachment styles. So based on how you react in the strange situation, you would be put into one of these 4 attachment styles. The first is secure attachment, and secure attachment would look like this. For the first stage, the baby would be playing with the caregiver in the room and using that caregiver as a base for exploration, meaning that the baby was safe and felt comfortable moving around and trying out new toys, but they were constantly touching bases back in with the caregiver, either coming and bringing the toy to show mom or looking up at dad and smiling and then going back to playing. When the caregiver was asked to leave, these babies get upset. They often will follow the caregiver to the door and they'll cry, but they soothe themselves very quickly and after just a matter of minutes have calmed down enough to go back to playing, even though they're still alone. And then when the caregiver returns, they're happy to see them. The next is an insecure attachment, and this is the avoidant attachment. And these babies don't seem to have a lot to do with the caregiver. When the caregiver's in the room, the baby's playing by itself and not touching bases with the caregiver. So when the caregiver leaves, these babies have little or no reaction. So what do you think happens when the caregiver comes back? That's right, they have little or no reaction again. The next attachment style is also insecure, and it's referred to as resistant attachment or sometimes anxious ambivalent attachment. And these babies are the really clingy babies who don't want to unvelcro themselves from mom and dad's leg to play with the toys at all. So when mom and dad leave, they get extremely upset. But unlike the babies who are securely attached, these babies don't self-soothe. They don't calm themselves down. They just cry and cry and cry. So when the caregiver returns, they reestablish contact because they're so relieved that they haven't been abandoned. They felt that way. They were scared, and then mom and dad left, and they felt abandoned. It was really upsetting. So when mom and dad returned, they're kind of relieved, but then they kind of also are resistant. So if you ever see a baby who asks to be picked up and then literally pushes away once they are picked up, that's a resistant attachment. It's like that they're so relieved, but they're also angry. It's a weird mixture. And then there's disorganized attachment. This is just a catch-all fourth category because some babies don't fit perfectly into one of the first three. They might show aspects of a couple different kinds of attachment together. So you've probably gleaned that parenting is one of the most important factors in determining attachment security, and that's true. Quality of caregiving is the #1 contributor. So the things that a caregiver needs to develop a secure attachment with their infant is first being stable. Stable means that you respond to the needs of the baby every single time. Additionally, you have to respond quickly and appropriately. So when a baby cries because they're hungry, you want to respond immediately, pick them up, and feed them. If you respond immediately but change them and don't meet the fundamental need, that's not going to develop a secure attachment. Some parents have a hard time with the idea of when should I let my baby just cry it out. And the reason they're concerned about that often is that they don't want to spoil a baby or develop manipulative behaviors in the baby. But the issue is that babies fundamentally from a cognitive perspective can't purposely manipulate you in the first year. So most developmentalists would recommend that you respond to a baby crying immediately and every single time in the first year of life. And after that, it's okay for babies to start crying a little bit longer and learning how to soothe themselves. Another interesting issue, though, has to do with synchrony. And synchrony is basically the quid pro quo between infant and the caregiver. So you'll notice that if you've ever held an infant, we often do mimicking. That if a baby smiles at us, we smile back. Or if they make a oh with their no mouth, we often will mimic that sound and shape with our mouth. This is synchrony. It's face-to-face mimicry. And this is a really important thing for development of attachment because it's sort of a reflection of the bond. There are, of course, though, some infant characteristics that could impact attachment. It's not entirely dictated by the parents because sometimes an infant can elicit certain kinds of parenting. For example, with their temperament. You read about easy babies versus difficult babies. Easy babies are much easier to parent. Difficult babies are very fussy and they get frustrating, and a parent might at some point be like, I don't know what you need. I can't help you right now because you just won't stop crying. And if they don't pick the baby up and respond then they're developing non-stable response patterns, and that can lead to an insecure attachment. Also, sometimes babies have things like illnesses, and if they have to be in the doctor's office doing tests or getting blood drawn and they're upset and they're crying like this infant here, but there's nothing that can be done because they need those things for their health, then a child could develop an insecure attachment as well because they're asking for help. They're scared by the situation. Something's wrong and it hurts, but the parent isn't able to do anything or isn't able to stop the procedure because it's needed for medical reasons. And finally, there are some family circumstances that can impact attachment. Stressors in general can be problematic because they make parents less responsive is one of the major reasons. So things like the loss of a job or losing one's home or a loss of someone that was loved in the family. Additionally, severe anger and violence between parents or anyone within the household can negatively impact attachment. Any kind of abuse is going to increase the likelihood of an insecure attachment. So you might be wondering, well, why does this matter? This all has to do with infants. Who cares? Well, Bowlby said that by 18 months we have developed an attachment style, and that he thought that was going to be how we were for the rest of our lives because it creates an internal working model, an internal mental schema, and that once that's set, that's what we move forward with. So he says by 18 months, the things that happen in the first months of your life with your caregiver are going to impact how you are as an adult. And what we find is that that's actually true. About 75% of us have the same attachment now that we did when we were 1 year old. This impacts our social skills and our relationships really profoundly. So, for example, securely attached children tend to become securely attached adults, and those securely attached adults have no problem trusting other people. They don't get overly clingy in their relationships, so they tend to have better relationships. Avoidant children who have a hard time trusting others and who would like to take care of themselves have a hard time letting others into their lives or putting down their boundaries so that they can form intimate relationships. Resistantly attached children tend to become overly clingy adults. So can your attachment change then? If it's the case that it is set by the time you're 18 months old, are you screwed if you have an insecure attachment? Like I just said, 75% of us have the same attachment now, but 25% of us don't. So that does say it can change. And the question is how? If you have an insecure attachment and you are able to find someone in your life who's securely attached, who's able to help you model securely attached behaviors, then you might be able to develop those. Or more commonly, people go to therapy. A lot of people go to therapy or counseling to work on their relationship issues. And a lot of relationship issues fundamentally come down to whether a person is able to allow others in or whether they're overly clingy and pushing people away. It's also possible for somebody to start with a secure attachment and develop an insecure attachment later. If, for example, there's some kind of a trauma in that person's life at any point, whether they've been cheated on by their spouse or they've lost a loved one or they've been raped, all of those can be quite detrimental to secure attachments. I want to say something now about emotional development, mainly that there are 6 basic emotions and that these are the emotions that you find in all cultures everywhere. The other emotions that aren't on this list are not universal, and that means that they don't exist in every culture. So the 6 basic universal emotions, starting in the upper left-hand corner moving to the right, we have happy, surprised, scared, sad, mad, and disgusted. So these are the first emotions that we tend to see in infants because they're universal and probably genetically pre-wired. Smiling doesn't happen until about the age of 3. A lot of people will say that they see their baby smiling earlier, and it's possible that they look like they're smiling, but they're doing it accidentally. You can't smile on purpose until you're about 3 months. You also don't cry tears until you're about 3 months. The tear ducts aren't fully developed, so when a baby quote-unquote cries early on, really what they're doing is screaming because there's no tears involved. At about 4 months, we start to see anger, anxiety in the form of separation anxiety at about 10 to 18 months. This is when babies become afraid of strangers. And then other self-aware emotions like shame or pride and from 8 to 12 months. And these are those secondary non-universal emotions. It's not the case that every human being ever has experienced shame. That's very culturally taught. One of the major contributors to our emotional development is something called primary intersubjectivity. And primary intersubjectivity is all about the infant-caregiver reciprocal interaction. This is that synchrony I mentioned before, where we're looking each other in the face and mimicking one another and playing and cuddling and kissing. All of those are primary intersubjectivity behaviors that are really important for the development of emotions, because it's through this that babies will learn how to express a lot of emotion. This is driven by things called mirror neurons, and mirror neurons are special neurons in our brain that cause us to mimic one another or mirror one another. So the mirror neurons is one of the things that makes us a very social species. Interestingly, there are things that can disrupt intersubjectivity, and in particular there's a lot of research data supporting this idea that maternal depression is problematic for babies' development because it harms intersubjectivity. So when a woman is depressed in a postpartum situation where she's feeling excessively sad and tired and having a hard time engaging with her infant, she's probably not doing as much of the synchrony behaviors. She's probably not mimicking the emotions or spending a lot of time focused on the infant because her depression is causing her attentions to go elsewhere. The problem here is that this lack of intersubjectivity can decrease a child's mental health as both a later child and even as an adult. So having a mom who is depressed can impact a child's mental health abilities, so things like risk for depression and anxiety themselves later in life. So if a woman is depressed after having a baby, it's really important that she seek out help and start dealing with the situation so that she's able to give the proper attention to developing emotions in her baby.